People assume betrayal begins with an action. A kiss that lasts too long. A message sent at the wrong hour. A name said once too often. But betrayal doesn't start there. It starts earlier, long before anything breaks, in the quiet agreements we make about who we think someone is. And who we believe ourselves to be. I met Julian at a charity fundraiser, the kind filled with polished smiles and soft lighting, where everyone speaks just loudly enough to be overheard saying something impressive. I wasn't supposed to stay long. I had promised myself 30 minutes, a brief appearance, then an early exit. Julian made that plan irrelevant within 5. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He wasn't trying to be. That was part of the appeal. While others leaned in too close, laughing too quickly, Julian stood slightly apart, observing. When he spoke, it was measured. Thoughtful. The kind of voice people instinctively paused to listen to. We were introduced by a mutual acquaintance whose name I no longer remember. Julian remembered it immediately. He remembered everything. "You're on the board, right?" he asked me. I nodded. "I am." "Arts Council," he said, without hesitation. 2 years now. That should have startled me more than it did. Instead, I smiled. People like to be seen. Julian understood that. He made eye contact without staring. He asked questions that didn't feel rehearsed. He listened without interrupting, then responded in a way that made you feel like the conversation had direction, as if it mattered. By the time I checked my watch, 45 minutes had passed. By the end of the evening, he had my number. He didn't text me that night. That was intentional. Julian believed in pacing. He waited 2 days before reaching out. Not too long. Not too eager. Just enough time for his absence to register. When his message came, it was simple. "I enjoyed talking with you. Coffee sometime this week?" No emojis. No unnecessary charm. I said yes. Looking back, I understand something I didn't then. Julian was always careful to appear reasonable. He framed desire as interest. Control as stability. Boundaries as respect. Our first date was unremarkable in the best way. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch into a walk. He didn't rush. He didn't push. When I mentioned work, he asked about it without competing. When I talked about my past, he didn't pry, just listened, nodding as if storing the information somewhere safe. By the third date, I felt calm around him. That felt like compatibility. Julian was successful, but he never flaunted it. His apartment was clean without being sterile. His wardrobe understated. He drove a sensible car. Everything about him communicated reliability. "You don't like chaos," he told me once. It wasn't a question. I laughed. "No, I don't." "Neither do I," he said. "Life's complicated enough without manufacturing problems." That sentence stayed with me. At the time, it sounded mature. Now I hear something else. Our relationship progressed steadily. No dramatic highs. No destabilizing lows. Julian was consistent. Attentive. Present in the ways that mattered. He remembered what I said. He noticed when I was tired. He sent messages at appropriate times. He never disappeared without explanation. When disagreements came up, small ones, he handled them calmly, framing them as things to be solved rather than emotions to be expressed. "I just want us to be aligned," he would say. Aligned. That word would follow us everywhere. Friends liked him immediately. My family trusted him without reservation. There was nothing about Julian that raised concern. That was part of the problem. When he proposed, it didn't feel like a leap. It felt like the next logical step. We were sitting in his living room, wine glasses half empty, the city lights flickering through the window. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't make a speech. "I don't believe in surprises," he said. "I believe in decisions." Then he asked me to marry him. I said yes without hesitation. The prenup came later. That conversation happened over dinner, casually introduced as if it were just another logistical step. "I want to be transparent," Julian said. "Given my business interests, my attorney recommends a prenuptial agreement." I paused. Not because I was offended, but because I hadn't expected it. "I want you to feel protected too," he added quickly. "This isn't about distrust. It's about clarity." Clarity. Another favorite word. He explained it calmly, walking me through the reasoning, emphasizing fairness, stability, foresight. He spoke as if the document were a mutual safeguard rather than a precaution designed primarily for him. "You should have your own lawyer review it," he said. "I insist." That made me trust him more. I did review it. Thoroughly. I asked questions. Julian answered them patiently. Nothing seemed alarming. The terms were strict, yes, but not cruel. Everything was framed as balance. And I believed we would never need it. People don't plan marriages expecting them to fail. They plan them expecting permanence. That was my mistake. The first year of marriage was smooth. Julian worked long hours, but that wasn't new. He was affectionate without being needy. Attentive without being intrusive. We hosted dinners. Took trips. Built routines. If there were moments of distance, I attributed them to stress. If there were nights he came home later than expected, he explained them easily. I trusted him. Trust simplifies things. It smooths over inconsistencies. It reframes questions as overthinking. Julian knew that. Looking back, I can see the earliest signs, though I didn't recognize them at the time. The subtle shift in tone when plans changed. The way he sometimes seemed elsewhere even while sitting beside me. The increasing use of phrases like later, eventually, we'll talk about it. Nothing concrete. Nothing actionable. Just enough to dismiss. The truth is, Julian didn't change all at once. He adjusted. Gradually. He stopped asking certain questions. He became more protective of his schedule. Not secretive, just selective. His phone was always nearby, but never obviously hidden. If I asked about his day, he gave answers that were complete without being detailed. Efficient. "You don't need to worry about everything," he said once, smiling. "I've got it handled." That was meant to be reassuring. I accepted it as such. There's a moment in many relationships when the balance subtly shifts, when one person begins carrying more emotional awareness than the other. I didn't notice when that happened for us. I only know that, at some point, I became the one adjusting. Adjusting expectations. Adjusting reactions. Adjusting silence. Julian never asked me to do this. He didn't need to. The structure of our life encouraged it naturally. He was busy. Important. Responsible. I was supportive. Understanding. Flexible. It worked beautifully. Until it didn't. The night that hindsight now marks as the beginning felt unremarkable at the time. Julian came home later than usual. Not alarmingly late, just enough to register. "You okay?" I asked. "Long meetings," he said. "Nothing interesting." He kissed my cheek, poured himself a drink, and sat beside me. He was present, but not engaged. His phone buzzed once. He glanced at it, then set it face down on the table. That was new. I noticed it, but I didn't comment. We ate dinner quietly. He talked about work. I listened. Everything was normal. Too normal. When we went to bed, he fell asleep quickly. I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, not anxious, just alert. That was the first night I remember feeling something unnamed shift. If you asked me when I stopped trusting Julian, I couldn't tell you. There was no moment. No revelation. Just a slow recalibration. Trust doesn't disappear suddenly. It thins. It stretches. It becomes conditional. Julian didn't realize that. He believed trust, once earned, was permanent. He believed attention faded when comfort set in. He was wrong. By the end of our second year of marriage, Julian's life had become fuller, professionally, socially, externally. Mine had become quieter. Not smaller. Just quieter. I still worked. I still had friendships. But my focus had narrowed, anchored by the belief that what mattered most was stable. Julian liked stability. Or at least, he liked the appearance of it. He talked often about the future, not emotionally, but strategically. "We need to think long-term," he'd say. "Let's not rush decisions. We'll revisit that later." Later became a placeholder for anything that required vulnerability. I accepted that too. The irony is this: Julian never intended to deceive me in the beginning. He believed in his own version of honesty, one that allowed him to compartmentalize without guilt. One that framed omission as discretion. One that justified silence as protection. He didn't see himself as a liar. He saw himself as a manager. Managing information. Managing expectations. Managing me. And for a long time, it worked. People often ask how someone intelligent can miss the signs. The answer is simple. Intelligence notices patterns. But attention notices people. I was intelligent. But for a while, I stopped paying attention. That was my contribution to what came next. By the time I started noticing again, Julian had already grown comfortable. Comfort makes people careless. And carelessness always leaves traces. That's where the real story begins. The first lie was not dramatic. That's what makes it dangerous. It didn't arrive wrapped in panic or urgency. It didn't demand a response. It didn't even feel dishonest at the time. It felt convenient. By the third year of our marriage, Julian had settled into himself. That's the best way I can describe it. He moved through our life with the confidence of someone who believed the structure around him was solid. Predictable. Managed. He had stopped performing. And that's when people reveal the truth of how they see you. Not through cruelty. Through assumptions. Julian began traveling more. At least, that's how he framed it. "I'll be gone a couple days next week," he said one evening, glancing up from his laptop. His tone was casual, almost apologetic, as if the inconvenience were minor. "Where to?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. Chicago. Meetings. That was the first lie. Not because it was false, I wouldn't learn that for some time, but because it was incomplete. It was shaped to end the conversation before it began. I nodded. Okay. That was my mistake. Trust trains you to accept answers at face value. It tells you that pressing further would be unnecessary. Invasive. Distrustful. Julian knew that. He kissed my forehead before leaving that morning, promised to call later, and walked out the door with the easy confidence of someone whose story wouldn't be questioned. He called that night. Briefly. Said he was tired. Said the meetings were productive. I'll make it up to you this weekend, he said. Another placeholder. When he returned, nothing seemed off. His suitcase smelled like hotel soap. His jacket carried the faint trace of someone else's cologne, but that could have been anyone. A handshake. An elevator. There were always explanations. And explanations, when offered calmly, are easy to accept. The second lie arrived weeks later. This one was smaller. I'm running late tonight, Julian texted. Dinner without me. No apology. No explanation. Just a statement. I replied with what he expected. Okay. That word did a lot of work in our marriage. It reassured him. It closed loops. It signaled compliance without conversation. He came home after 10, energized despite the hour. He took off his jacket, poured a drink, and sat beside me on the couch. I missed you today, he said, kissing my cheek. That should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt misplaced. It wasn't suspicion that crept in then. It was awareness. Julian had always been careful with timing. With energy. With transitions. He didn't usually come home buzzing after a long day unless something had gone exceptionally well. Or exceptionally wrong. I didn't ask. I let the moment pass. The first lie I truly noticed came a month later. We were having breakfast. The light through the window was soft, familiar. Julian was skimming emails on his phone while sipping coffee. I might have to cancel dinner with your sister next week, he said. Why? I asked. Work thing, he replied. Something came up. Something came up. Another placeholder. What kind of work thing? I asked, lightly. He glanced up, surprised, not annoyed, just momentarily wrong-footed. A client dinner, he said. Last minute. There it was. The pause before the answer. It lasted less than a second. But it existed. And once you notice pauses, you start noticing everything. I didn't confront him. Confrontation ends observation. Instead, I adjusted. I listened more closely. I watched patterns. I noted phrasing. I stopped filling in blanks for him. Julian didn't notice the shift. He believed I was still operating under the same assumptions. The thing about lies is that they don't live alone. They require reinforcement. Julian began reinforcing. He mentioned names more often, colleagues, clients, vague professional obligations. He framed his absence as responsibility rather than choice. I'm doing this for us, he said once, when I commented on how little we'd been home together lately. That sentence worked. It always had. Until it didn't. The first time I checked something without telling him, I surprised myself. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't feel guilty. I felt practical. Julian had left his laptop open on the desk while he showered. An email notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Lunch, Tuesday, 12:30. No name. Just time. Just recurrence. I stared at it longer than necessary. Lunches are easy to explain. Everyone eats. Everyone schedules. But something about the precision bothered me. Julian didn't usually schedule lunches. He improvised them. I closed the laptop without reading further. That mattered to me. I wasn't trying to catch him. I was trying to understand him. There's a difference. That evening, I asked casually, "How was your day?" "Busy," he said. "Meetings all day." "All day?" I repeated. "Yes," he said, smoothly. "Back to back." He didn't mention lunch. I nodded. That was the first lie I consciously let him tell. It's important to understand why I didn't challenge him then. I wasn't afraid of what I'd find. I was measuring something else. Julian's confidence. The ease with which he spoke. The way his answers were structured to close conversation rather than invite it. He believed his narrative was intact. He believed I was still listening the way I always had. He was wrong. From that point on, I became careful with my reactions. Careful not to reveal awareness. Careful not to disrupt rhythm. Because people reveal more when they feel safe. Julian felt safe. He began mentioning M occasionally. Not directly. Just in passing. M's team is handling that. M suggested we approach it differently. Always professional. Always abstract. I never asked who M was. That silence encouraged him. Weeks passed. Nothing exploded. Nothing collapsed. But something settled. A quiet understanding, one-sided but real, that Julian was telling stories now. Not lies exactly. Stories. Curated. Controlled. Incomplete. The second time I checked without telling him, I found confirmation. Not proof. Confirmation. A calendar entry synced across devices before Julian realized the permissions had changed. Lunch, 12:30 p.m. M. Just an initial. Just enough. He hadn't meant for me to see it. That mattered more than what it represented. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I noted it. That's when I understood something critical. Julian hadn't become reckless. He had become confident. And confidence is what comes right before mistakes. That night, lying beside him while he slept, I didn't feel betrayed. I felt alert. The kind of alertness that comes when you realize a story you've been living inside is no longer the full one. I didn't know what Julian was doing yet. But I knew he was managing more than one version of himself. And I knew something else too. He believed I wouldn't notice. That belief would undo him. There's a moment when you start paying attention again, when you realize you have been living on autopilot. Not because you're careless. Because you believed you were safe. Safety makes you generous with assumptions. It makes you fill in blanks on someone else's behalf. It makes you interpret gaps as stress, silence as fatigue, distance as temporary. I had been doing that for Julian. 4 years. And the worst part was this, it had worked. Our marriage looked stable from the outside because I had learned how to stabilize it from the inside. I had smoothed the edges of his moods. I had lowered my own expectations at just the right moments. I had made room for his schedule without demanding that he make room for me. I didn't call it sacrifice. I called it partnership. Until the pattern changed. The calendar entry, lunch, Tuesday, 12:30 p.m. did not haunt me the way it would have haunted a younger version of myself. It didn't make me rage. It didn't make me cry. It made me quiet. And quiet, I learned, was useful. Because quiet allowed me to listen more carefully than emotion ever had. Julian's schedule became a rhythm I could predict. That sounds dramatic, but it wasn't. It was mundane. You notice it in small things, the way he dressed on certain days, the cologne he wore when he didn't have to, the extra minutes he spent looking at himself in the mirror before leaving. The way he checked his phone after brushing his teeth, as if waiting for something to confirm the day's direction. He didn't do that for work. Julian didn't need permission from work. Work needed him. So who was he waiting on? I didn't ask. I watched. On Tuesday mornings, he moved differently. Lighter. More alert. Not happy exactly, Julian rarely displayed happiness in a careless way, but charged. Focused. Like a man preparing for a performance. When I tried to place it, I realized it felt like the energy he'd had when we were dating. That realization landed sharply. Because it meant the energy still existed. It just wasn't for me anymore. On the first Tuesday I decided to test what I knew. I did it casually. We were eating breakfast. Julian was already dressed, tie perfectly centered, cufflinks in place. He didn't usually wear cufflinks unless he had an important meeting. Or unless he wanted to feel important. "Do you have anything around lunch today?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He didn't look up. Not really. Why? I was thinking we could meet downtown, I said. I'll be near your office around noon. There was a pause. A real pause this time. Not the blink and you miss it hesitation from before. He set his coffee down carefully. I might be tied up, he said. A client might need me. Okay, I replied, as if it didn't matter. Another time. He nodded quickly, relief visible in the way his shoulders loosened. That told me everything. After he left, I stood in the kitchen longer than necessary, staring at the empty mug he'd used. The lie itself wasn't the point. The effort was. Julian was protecting something. Not from discovery, but from overlap. He didn't want two parts of his life touching each other. That was intentional. And intention is where patterns begin. I didn't follow him. Not physically. I didn't drive by restaurants. I didn't stalk locations. I didn't do anything that would make me feel like the kind of woman who needed to prove something. I had never needed proof to make decisions. What I needed was clarity. And clarity comes from information gathered calmly. So I built a system. I started with small records. Not obsessive ones. Just practical. I created a folder on my laptop labeled innocuously, Household. Inside it, I began saving things. Receipts he'd emailed himself. Hotel confirmations from shared accounts. Calendar entries that appeared briefly, then vanished when he realized they were visible. Airline miles activity. Charge patterns that didn't align with his stated whereabouts. I didn't do this in one night. I did it slowly, carefully, with the steady patience of someone assembling a picture piece by piece. Julian didn't notice because Julian did not believe I would ever do something like this. He believed I was emotional. He believed I was forgiving. He believed I valued peace more than truth. He believed all women eventually choose comfort over confrontation. That belief was his advantage. Until it became his weakness. A week later, Julian added a new phrase to his vocabulary. Restructuring. It came out of nowhere. We were eating dinner. He was scrolling his phone with one hand, cutting his food with the other. His attention was split, but his voice was smooth. I've been thinking about restructuring some things, he said. I kept my expression neutral. Restructuring what? He shrugged. Life. Work. Priorities. Long-term. Long-term. That was his other favorite word. It sounded like maturity. Like planning. Like responsibility. But the way he said it felt like something else. Like preparation. I asked, is something wrong? Julian smiled, as if I had misunderstood. No. Nothing's wrong. I just don't want us drifting. I want things to stay efficient. Efficient. I stared at him for a moment. He didn't notice. He never noticed the moments when I stared because he assumed my silence meant acceptance. The truth was, I was cataloging him. Because people tell you who they are, repeatedly. You just have to stop translating it into something kinder. That night, he initiated intimacy. That might seem like a good sign, but it wasn't. Not for us. Julian rarely initiated without purpose. He wasn't cold. He was controlled. Intimacy, for him, was another way to maintain balance. A way to reinforce the version of us he wanted to keep intact. Afterward, he kissed my shoulder and said, I missed you. The words were familiar. The feeling behind them was not. I turned slightly, facing away, pretending to fall asleep. He fell asleep immediately. I stayed awake. Not because I was hurting. Because I was thinking. Here's what most people don't tell you about betrayal. It's not the affair that breaks you. It's the realization that you were being managed. That your reactions were anticipated. Your questions avoided. Your emotional labor used as insulation for someone else's choices. Julian didn't just want a wife. He wanted a stabilizer. And I had been excellent at it. 2 days later, I got something I hadn't expected. A slip. Julian came home on Thursday night later than usual. He was in a mood, not angry, not happy, but restless. He moved quickly through the apartment, like he had somewhere else to be even though he was home. He took off his jacket and checked his phone twice within a minute. I asked, casually, rough day? He exhaled. Just, complicated. Complicated. That word didn't belong to Julian. Julian hated complicated. Julian fixed complicated. Unless complicated was something he couldn't fix without losing something. Anything I can do? I asked. He shook his head too fast. No. Then he added, just give me a minute. I watched him. He poured a drink, took one sip, then set it down untouched. That was unusual. Julian liked control. He didn't like anything interfering with his ability to manage his presentation. Alcohol loosened edges. He didn't want edges loosened tonight. Why? When he finally sat beside me, he leaned back and stared at the television without watching it. You've been quiet lately, he said. I didn't look at him. Have I? Yes, he said. It's different. Different. I waited. He shifted slightly, as if deciding whether to speak. I just want to make sure we're okay, he said. There it was. Not a question of love. A question of stability. He was checking the structure. I met his eyes and gave him exactly what he needed. We're fine, I said. Relief passed over his face. And just like that, his guard lowered. The next morning, I checked the shared airline account. I didn't do it out of desperation. I did it because Julian had reminded me he was managing something. And managers leave paper trails. The account showed recent activity. A booking. 2 seats. Not confirmed yet, a hold, pending payment. But it was there. Destination, the same city he had claimed to be traveling to for work last month. 2 seats. Julian wasn't traveling for work. Not alone. My hands didn't shake as I took a screenshot and saved it in the folder. I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. I didn't confront him that day. I cooked dinner. I asked him about his meetings. I listened as he described a schedule that now sounded scripted. He kissed my cheek. He told me he missed me. I smiled as if I believed him. Because this wasn't the moment for confrontation. This was the moment for precision. That weekend, Julian suggested we visit my sister. It seemed random. It wasn't. It was an image maintenance move. A way to reinforce his role as devoted husband, present partner, stable man. He needed witnesses. I went. I smiled. I laughed at appropriate times. I played my part. Julian watched me carefully, scanning for cracks. He found none. That reassured him. It should have. Instead, it made him careless. The slip came Sunday night. We were getting ready for bed. Julian was in the bathroom, brushing his teeth. His phone was on the nightstand, screen facing up. A notification lit it. Not a name. A single letter. M. A message preview flashed briefly. Can't wait for Tuesday. That was all I saw. It lasted less than a second before the screen dimmed again. Julian came out of the bathroom moments later, still brushing, and glanced at his phone. He froze for a fraction of a moment. Then, with deliberate calm, he flipped it face down. He looked at me. You okay? He asked. I smiled. Of course. He nodded, reassured, and climbed into bed. He fell asleep quickly. I lay awake beside him, staring into the dark, and did something I hadn't done yet. I let myself feel it. Not the rage. Not the heartbreak. The insult. Because that's what betrayal is, when you strip away the romance and drama. An insult to your reality. An assumption that you are too distracted, too soft, too invested in peace to notice what is happening. Julian had built his entire strategy on one belief. That I would rather preserve the marriage than face the truth. And for a long time, he was right. Until I stopped being that woman. By morning, I had made a decision. Not to confront him. Not to expose him. Not yet. I decided to prepare. Because there is a difference between discovery and action. Discovery is emotional. Action is calculated. And if Julian wanted to play a game of narratives, I would play it better. He had practice. But I had patience. And patience, used correctly, is power. I didn't wake up angry the next morning. That surprised me. If anything, I felt lighter, not because what I'd seen was less cruel than I feared, but because uncertainty had finally begun to solidify into shape. There is a peculiar relief that comes when you stop guessing. Julian had a Tuesday. And someone, M, couldn't wait for it. I lay beside him for a moment, listening to his breathing. Even asleep, he looked composed. Julian always looked composed, as if his body itself had learned not to reveal fear. When he stirred, I moved before he could fully wake. I kissed his cheek the way I always did and got out of bed. Routine was armor. In the kitchen, I made coffee and stood at the counter without drinking it, letting the quiet settle. I wasn't planning a confrontation. Confrontation would give Julian an enemy. I wasn't planning an accusation. Accusations invite denials, and Julian was excellent at denials. What I was planning was precision. Because when you are dealing with someone who manages reality, the only way to win is to understand the machinery behind the management. So I started with something simple. I stopped making it easy for him to disappear. At breakfast, I asked, casually, "Do you have lunch today?" Julian didn't look up from his phone. Probably not. Why? I might be downtown, I said. We could meet if you're free. The pause came again. He wasn't good at hiding it when he was surprised. He was good at recovering afterward. Today's packed, he said smoothly. Back-to-back meetings. It was a lie, delivered with the calm of someone who believed he was entitled to it. Okay, I said, and returned to my coffee. Julian's shoulders relaxed. He thought the test was over. It wasn't. After he left, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into the shared airline account and checked the settings. Not bookings. Not history. Settings. Because shared accounts don't only show purchases, they show permissions. Julian had once added me as a trusted user to simplify logistics. He'd done it early in our marriage, when the act of sharing looked like intimacy rather than access. At the time, it had felt sweet. Now, it felt useful. The settings confirmed what I already suspected: notifications were still enabled. If Julian booked, held, or changed a flight, the record lived somewhere my name could reach. He hadn't removed me. That meant he hadn't planned for me to look. That meant he believed I wouldn't. By noon, I had done nothing dramatic. No stalking. No spying in parking lots. No frantic searches for clues. Instead, I opened my calendar and wrote down what I knew. Tuesday, 12:30. M. Anticipation. Travel, 2 seats. Restructuring, language shift. Phone face down, new habit. These were not proof of an affair by themselves. But they were proof of something else. Julian was managing more than one version of his life. And management leaves patterns behind. That evening, Julian came home in a good mood. Not euphoric. Not nervous. Content. He kissed my cheek, asked how my day was, moved through the apartment with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed his lie had landed cleanly. How was your day? I asked him. Busy, he replied. But good. Did you eat lunch? I asked, lightly. He blinked. I grabbed something quick. What did you get? He hesitated. That half-second again. Then, a sandwich. Near the office. I nodded as if it was meaningless. Julian believed details were only dangerous when people insisted on them. He didn't realize I was collecting them quietly. The next morning, I didn't mention lunch. I didn't mention Tuesday. I didn't mention anything that would alert him. Instead, I watched. Julian dressed with unusual care. Tie precise. Shoes polished. Cufflinks again. He checked his phone, then checked it again. Big day? I asked. He smiled. Just meetings. Meetings. Always meetings. He kissed me quickly and left. Tuesday at 12:15, I received the calendar alert again. Lunch, 12:30 p.m. This time, I didn't just note it. I clicked it. The invite opened. It was sparse. Minimal. No location visible. No description. No shared attendees. Julian had stripped it down. But stripped down entries still carry metadata. The invite was recurring. Weekly. 4 months. And it had been created from an account Julian used for work. Which meant he felt comfortable enough to place her inside the professional structure of his life. That detail mattered. Julian didn't chase chaos. He incorporated convenience. I didn't accept or decline the invite. I didn't change anything. I simply looked at it long enough to learn what it could offer. Then I closed it. If Julian checked later, he would see no trace of my touch. That was important. Julian was cautious. He wasn't paranoid yet. I intended to keep it that way. By 1:30, Julian still hadn't texted. That was normal on Tuesdays. He often disappeared around lunch and reappeared later with vague explanations about back-to-back calls. At 2:10, he finally messaged. Crazy day. Might be late. No apology. No justification. Just a statement designed to end conversation. I replied with one word. Okay. Julian liked that word. It made him careless. That night, when he came home, he looked energized again. Not tired. Not stressed. Charged. He poured himself a drink and kissed my cheek. I missed you today, he said. The line sounded rehearsed now. What did you do after work? I asked, casually. He didn't hesitate this time. Met with a client. Which one? His eyes flickered. Just someone new. Nothing you'd know. I nodded. There was a faint irritation under his calm, as if my questions were inconveniences he hadn't anticipated. Then he softened again, sliding into charm. I'm thinking we should plan something, he said. A weekend away. Just us. Just us. The phrase didn't feel romantic. It felt corrective. As if he sensed imbalance and wanted to restore it with a gesture. I smiled. That could be nice. Julian looked relieved. He went to bed that night believing he'd smoothed everything. But the next day, he made a mistake. It was small. The kind of mistake only attention catches. He showered in the morning and left his laptop open on the desk again. A notification popped up. Not a calendar. An email. The sender line flashed briefly. Mar. Then it disappeared. But not before my brain registered the beginning of the name. March. Not M. March. That mattered. I didn't touch the laptop. Not yet. I waited until Julian left for work. Then I sat in the office chair and opened the screen slowly. The email wasn't visible anymore. But the inbox was. Julian had gotten sloppy with one thing: previews. In the corner, the recent message list showed a partial sender name: Marissa H. My stomach didn't drop. My pulse didn't spike. What I felt was the calm satisfaction of a puzzle piece clicking into place. Marissa. Not M. The initial had been camouflage. The full name was the reality. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. Opening it might leave a read receipt. Julian might notice. And I wasn't ready for him to notice. I wrote the name down and closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it. Then I did what Julian never expected. I didn't spiral. I worked. I cleaned. I went to a meeting. I lived my day normally. Because normal is what keeps a lie comfortable. And I wanted Julian comfortable. That evening, I searched her name. Not on social media first. That would have been too loud. I started with public records. People leave trails even when they curate their lives. Marissa H. was enough. Within minutes, I found her. Mid-level marketing. Recently divorced. Lived 2 neighborhoods away. Her online presence was polished, curated, softly vulnerable. The kind of account that posts new beginnings without ever admitting what ended. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't young enough to be naive. She wasn't the type to hide in shadows. Julian didn't choose a woman like that unless he believed he could manage her. I scrolled slowly through her photos. Not to torture myself. To understand. Most posts were harmless. Work events. Friends. A dog. A carefully lit apartment. Then I saw it. A photo from a restaurant. The lighting, the table setting, the wall art. I recognized it immediately. It was the same place Julian had said he'd just discovered. My mouth went dry. Not because I was devastated. Because the lie was so casual. So effortless. He had said it with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. I closed the browser and sat still for a long moment. Then I opened my notes file. Marissa H. lived close. Lunches on Tuesdays. Restaurant overlap. Trip, 2 seats. Julian's weekend away suggestion, corrective. This wasn't a fling. This was a structure. And Julian had built it carefully. The next decision I made was the most important one. I decided not to contact her. Not yet. Because contacting her would force a reaction. And reaction would change the pacing. I wasn't ready to change the pacing. I needed to prepare. I needed to decide what my goal was before I stepped into the story Julian had written. Because if I entered as the betrayed wife, I would be playing his script. If I entered as something else, something calm, strategic, and precise, I would be writing my own. Julian came home late that night. He was humming again. He seemed pleased with himself. "You seem happy," I said. "I had a good day," he replied. I smiled. "That's good." He kissed my cheek. And for the first time, I felt nothing behind the gesture. No anger. No sadness. Just absence. The emptiness didn't scare me. It steadied me. Because emptiness meant I could act without emotion leading. And Julian had no idea that the woman he believed I would never find had a name now. A face. A life. And that the moment I learned it, the balance shifted. Not in his favor. In mine. Once you know the truth, the world doesn't shatter. That surprised me. I had always assumed discovery would feel like impact, sharp, violent, immediate. Something that knocked the breath out of you and left you scrambling for stability. Instead, it felt like recalibration. As if my internal compass, long bent toward preserving something fragile, had finally corrected itself. Julian was still Julian. The apartment was still the same. Our routines still held. But I was no longer guessing. And that changed everything. The morning after I learned Marissa's name, Julian left early. Earlier than usual. He kissed my cheek, picked up his briefcase, and paused by the door like he wanted to say something else. Then he didn't. The door closed. I stood there for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway, and felt something unexpected settle in. Focus. Not anger. Focus. The prenup lived in a fireproof folder in the back of a cabinet I rarely opened. Julian had insisted on that cabinet. Important documents, he'd said, as if saying the words out loud would give them weight. I hadn't touched the folder in years. Not because I'd forgotten it existed. Because I'd never believed it would matter. That morning, I took it out and placed it on the dining table. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first. I sat down. I let myself breathe. Because I wasn't reading it as a frightened spouse. I was reading it as someone preparing for consequences. The document was exactly as I remembered it. Clean. Precise. Unemotional. Julian had always liked contracts. He believed they removed uncertainty. That they replaced feeling with structure. He'd explained it to me once, long ago, with a confidence that had felt reassuring. This protects us, he'd said. Both of us. I'd believed him. Now, I read it without trust coloring the words. And something shifted. The language around conduct wasn't dramatic. It didn't use words like infidelity or betrayal. Julian disliked language that implied judgment. Instead, it used phrases like material non-disclosure, financial entanglement, external obligations. Cold words. Efficient words. Words designed to sound neutral while carving out advantage. I read slowly. Then I read again. Because the thing about contracts is this, they don't lie. They simply wait for the right moment to speak. Julian hadn't written the prenup himself. But he had approved it. And the more I read, the clearer something became. He had been thinking ahead. Not about love. About exits. Not because he expected to leave me. But because he expected to protect himself if he ever did. Julian never planned for failure. He planned for options. There were clauses that had once seemed abstract. They didn't anymore. Clauses triggered by timeline. Clauses triggered by financial movement. Clauses triggered by third-party entanglement. Julian had believed these clauses were shields. He hadn't considered they could become restraints. Because that would require imagining himself on the wrong side of them. People rarely do that. By the time I finished reading, I understood two things clearly. First, Julian was already closer to triggering consequences than he realized. Second, I needed professional distance. Emotion had no role here. So I called Martha. Martha had been my lawyer long before she became my lawyer in this context. She was precise. Calm. Uninterested in drama. When I asked if she had time to meet, she didn't ask why. She simply said, "This afternoon." That told me she understood. Martha's office was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No clutter. No distractions. She let me talk without interruption, then asked questions that cut through noise. "Are you sure?" she asked, not unkindly. "Yes." "How sure?" "Enough to prepare." She nodded once. Preparation doesn't require certainty. Just consistency. I handed her the prenup. She reviewed it carefully, page by page, pen hovering but not touching. When she finished, she looked up. "He assumed compliance," she said. "Yes," I replied. "He always does." "He also assumed discretion," she added. "Which is different." We sat with that for a moment. "What do I need to avoid?" I asked. "Emotional confrontation," she said immediately. "Anything that allows him to claim provocation or reconciliation attempts." "And what do I need to do?" She tapped the document lightly. "Let him move." That was the answer I expected. When I got home, Julian wasn't there. He texted an hour later. "Late meeting. Don't wait up." I didn't. I made dinner for one and ate it calmly. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt relieved. The less he was here, the more clearly I could think. Julian came home after 10. He looked tired, but not drained. Satisfied. He poured a drink, loosened his tie, and sat beside me on the couch. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He searched my face for something: tension, resentment, curiosity. Finding none reassured him. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. "I'm thinking we should plan that weekend soon," he said. "Before things get too busy." The weekend. The corrective gesture again. "That could be nice," I replied. He smiled. He thought the marriage was stabilizing. He didn't realize I was letting it stay intact long enough to serve its purpose. The next few weeks passed quietly. Too quietly. Julian settled into his routine with renewed confidence. He stopped over-explaining. He announced plans rather than discussing them. "I'll be out Thursday," he'd say. "I'm traveling next week. I might be late." I responded with calm acceptance. He took that as confirmation. Behind the scenes, I documented everything. Dates. Times. Language shifts. Financial anomalies. Nothing dramatic. Just accumulation. Julian didn't move money yet. But he began talking about it. Restructuring accounts. Simplifying responsibilities. Reducing friction. Friction was his word for resistance. One night, he brought home paperwork. Not the prenup. New documents. "I've been thinking about organizing some things," he said, placing the folder on the table. "Just planning ahead." I didn't touch the folder. "What kind of planning?" I asked. "Long term," he replied. "Nothing urgent." Nothing urgent was how Julian described things that were very urgent to him. "I can look later," I said. He nodded, relieved. He hadn't expected resistance. He hadn't expected scrutiny either. That night, after he fell asleep, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. "I'm sorry if this is inappropriate." I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "Who is this?" The reply came quickly. "Marissa." There it was. Not hidden. Not coded. Direct. My pulse didn't change. I replied calmly. What do you want? The pause before her answer was longer. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in pain. In recognition. Julian had begun losing control of one side of the story. And when that happens, people reach for the person they believe is most stable. That person was no longer him. I didn't respond immediately. Urgency benefits the wrong people. Instead, I waited. Then I typed. What kind of misunderstanding? Her response came slower this time. I didn't know he was still married. That sentence mattered. Not because I believed it without question, but because Julian believed he could manage information. He had failed. I replied. When did you find out? She answered honestly. Recently. I asked one more question. What did he tell you about us? Her answer filled in blanks I hadn't asked for. That we were distant. That we were practical. That things were complicated. Julian's favorite word. By the time I set my phone down, I knew something else. Julian was no longer in control of the timing. The moment Marissa reached out to me, the balance shifted again. Not emotionally. Structurally. I didn't tell Julian about the message. Not yet. I needed him to keep moving. Because every step he took without full awareness brought him closer to consequences he hadn't planned for. Lying beside him that night, listening to his breathing, I felt no urge to wake him. No urge to scream or cry. What I felt was certainty. Julian believed the prenup was protection. He believed the marriage was stable enough to give him room. He believed he had time. He was wrong. And the moment he decided to make his exit cleanly, everything would be ready. Not to destroy him, but to hold him accountable.